saw feet out there. False alarm on the stocky.
Fishing boots.
Right, false fishing boots. False start on the stucky.
Okay, everyone, we are one elevator ride away. I really do apologize for the delay.
Yeah, I would have put on time.
I think we are good to go. Jen already made introductions, did she not? Okay, so we are set. So good morning, and thank you for being here. This is going to be a little bit of it's a more granular press conference than what we normally do because there's a lot of information here today. So please bear with us and be patient because, as you'll see, what we're about to talk about today, this doesn't happen. Never should have happened, and so we have to fix it to understand the root cause of this problem and make sure it never happens again. So I want to take a moment to acknowledge Krystal's mother, Yolanda Rivera, who is here, and also her stepfather, Rico Thompson, and her sisters who are also here today. And this is just a long string of unthinkable days for this family since June 5th to think about why they're even here. And so hopefully this lawsuit will accomplish what we always try to do, and that is take our road and bridge to truth and accountability. So, what could be more disturbing for a Chicago police officer to think that her partner would ever shoot her in the line of duty? There can be nothing more shocking when that partner is actually shot. And there is nothing more mortifying that when that partner is shot, that the shooting partner leaves her there to die. The Chicago Police Department knew that Carlos Baker was a liability. The Chicago Police Department knew that Carlos Baker was unfit for duty as a Chicago police officer. The Chicago Police Department knew that Carlos Baker was reckless, a rule breaker, and certainly not qualified for assignment as a TAC officer. One of the department's rules, one of their highest standards that they adhere to, is the sanctity of life. This is a quote from their general orders. The department's highest priority is the sanctity of human life. In all aspects of their conduct, department members will act with the foremost regard for the preservation of human life and the safety of all persons involved. Krystal Rivera on June 5th was that human. She deserved sanctity. A TAC officer, Carlos Baker and Krystal Rivera, they are not patrol officers. They are more specialized than patrol officers. Indeed, Carlos Baker was assigned as a TAC officer twice. The first time he was removed because he was not qualified. So a TAC officer has a specialized investigative role. And a TAC officer should never be one if he is reckless. Krystal Rivera was Carlos Baker's partner, and she knew that Carlos Baker was reckless. Now, she told her supervisors that Carlos Baker was reckless. That's why I can tell you with confidence that Chicago Police Department knew. They knew at all times. Although they did not attend the police academy together, Krystal was accurately painting the picture of what the CPD knew from its earliest days about Carlos Baker, and that is that he never should have been a Chicago police officer. He never should have gotten past his probationary period. He was not fit to police our communities, let alone carry a gun under the color of law. The decision CPD made to keep Carlos Baker on the force was not costly, ladies and gentlemen. It was fatal. It was his pull of the trigger, discharging a bullet with his partner behind him, that struck Krystal Rivera in the back. And but for his recklessness, Krystal Rivera would not have been shot. But worse, he ignored the sanctity of life. He ignored her after she was shot. He ignored not only his partner being shot, but he ignored the fact that Krystal Rivera was also his romantic partner. At no time did Carlos Baker render any substantive medical aid to Krystal. He did not render it to a wounded person, let alone his partner or his romantic partner, as he was trained. He let her die. He made a desperate attempt to call in. Krystal made a desperate attempt to call in her own shooting. You know why? Because not only did he make the intentional decision to not render aid to her, incredibly, he didn't call for an ambulance. In fact, his cover-up began after he shot her. Immediately, he claimed that shots were fired at police, when the only shot that was fired that night was from his gun in Krystal's direction. Three hours after Krystal was shot, the Chicago Police Department filed reports with the Illinois Department of Labor claiming that Officer Rivera was shot by an armed suspect who had a barricaded person, when in fact she had been shot by her own partner. So CPD not only bought the narrative, they purchased it, they published it, they went ahead with it. CPD filed at least 4 separate reporting forms with the state in which Krystal was said to have been either on scene of a barricaded person or, quote, shot by a suspect, including one report that explicitly stated, quote, police officer was shot by a suspect that had barricaded themselves, end quote. Months went by, and those reports never were corrected. False reports based on a false narrative, based on Carlos Baker leaving Krystal Rivera to die. So, you're asking, why did this happen? How and why? Well, we gave one explanation: his recklessness. Whatever suspect was in the room was in front of Carlos Baker. Krystal Rivera would have been to his back. She was in a tactical position behind him. And somehow he managed to shoot her on a 180-degree angle. So there's a history between Carlos Baker and Krystal Rivera that's both professional and personal. And some of those details I'd like to share with you. So we know that as far back as December of 2022, we've started seeing a pattern in Carlos Baker's life because he became somewhat of a known figure because he was with the Chicago Police Department. And at that time, we know that he had committed an act which, had it been charged and prosecuted, would have been considered an act of domestic violence. He flashed a gun at a prior romantic partner of his while she was on a date. Unfortunately, that case, not only was it never prosecuted, the investigation was dropped 3 months after it was started, and COPA let it go. But if you understand that for a Chicago police officer, when they're convicted of a domestic violence act, whether it's a misdemeanor or a felony, that's a violation of the Lautenberg Act, which is a federal act, which prohibits anyone convicted of domestic violence to carry a weapon. And that would have been his death sentence right there. When it comes to being a police officer, it would have ended right there, and guess what? These fine people would not have been to my left. We wouldn't be here. Should have ended right there. But then, in early 2023, a relationship begins, a personal relationship begins between Krystal and Carlos Baker. I have never been a Chicago police officer. I've never been in a car with somebody for hours and hours. But it's anecdotal that when two people spend that much time together, there can develop that attraction and a relationship develop afterwards. And we can only speculate right now that that's what happened. In March of 2023, we can tell you that that's when CPD supervisors became aware. They knew about that romantic relationship. So the chain of command above them knew. In May of 2025, Krystal ended their relationship because Carlos Baker was with another woman. In June of 2025, just a day before Krystal was shot, Carlos Baker shows up unannounced at Krystal's home. On June 5th, 2025, Krystal is shot by Carlos Baker and left to die. So the lawsuit that's been filed And we apologize in advance, but our clerk of the circuit court has been making us jump through very unusual hoops today to get you a file stamp copy of this complaint. Hoops and hurdles that we've never encountered before. But we have filed it, and we have proof that it's been filed. And it includes multiple counts against Chicago Police Department for its failure to properly investigate and discipline Baker for numerous complaints, including that domestic violence complaint I just outlined, with whom he was romantically involved. Further, the lawsuit notes that Krystal informed CPD that she was concerned Baker was reckless and asked that they be reassigned so they were no longer partners. And it's important for you to understand that this tragedy was absolutely foreseeable, and not only foreseeable result of Baker's willful and wanton conduct, but also the foreseeable consequence of the city of Chicago's own negligence with respect to the retention and supervision of Baker. I cannot repeat that enough. Baker should never have gotten past his probationary period, and I know that one of our attorneys today will discuss the prior complaint history for Carlos Baker. It might even be me. Baker, as I told you, positioned himself directly in front of the door with his service weapon drawn and pointed at the door. Krystal was positioned herself in a tactical stance behind him, and then Baker kicked open the door to the apartment to find an unknown person pointing a weapon at him, and that's when the shot was fired. He did not attempt even the most basic first aid step of applying pressure on her wound to mitigate blood loss or try any other life-saving measures. Baker left Krystal there on the floor, literally gasping. Krystal radioed in her own shooting. Her voice wasn't strong, but she radioed in her own shooting because Baker did not. He did not immediately inform or attempt to inform CPD dispatch that Krystal had been shot. That's a requirement under CPD policy. He was trained to do so. He did not request an ambulance for her, nor did he ask for or attempt to request backup. He ran in an opposite direction of where Krystal was. His failure to act promptly delayed the arrival of medical help when every second matters. It was not until after CPD dispatch sent additional patrol, somebody else had to come to the scene, that Baker radioed to dispatch shots fired at the police. Baker never admitted or clarified that he was the only one who discharged a weapon and that the shot fired came from his own service weapon. There was no other gunfire that occurred during the encounter other than that single gunshot. So his conscious decision in those critical moments after he shot Krystal showed his utter personal disdain for her and the dereliction of his duties as an officer and as her partner. He was the only person in that moment who could call for emergency help or render aid, and he chose to do neither. Those willful and wanton choices clearly contributed to her death. And so the lawsuit will detail how the personal relationship, recent breakup, and his knowledge that Krystal planned to confront his live-in girlfriend about his relationship with Krystal contributed to his decision to refrain from attempting to save her life that night. Krystal should have been able to rely on her partner to do just what he was supposed to do after she was shot. But against all decency, her partner not only shot her, but then ran in an opposite direction and left her to die. So here are some of Carlos Baker's history of complaints about him prior to him shooting Krystal. Baker had committed 11 misconduct complaints in less than 3 years on the force, a record worse than 95% of CPD officers. And this is a subject that I know very well because I have tried cases with these statistical numbers, and I am keenly aware of who the worst performers are as police officers in the city. His very first day as a probationary officer is when he caught his first complaint. 1 day, 1 complaint. Well, that's batting 100%. 4 months later, a woman he had been dating filed a complaint alleging that Baker brandished his firearm at her during a domestic dispute. And that's what I told you about, that had it resulted in even a misdemeanor conviction, he would have been taken off the force because he can't carry a gun. Despite those allegations, COPA closed the domestic violence investigation just 3 months without any determination. And we know that COPA takes sometimes years to finish out their history of complaints. Baker faced no discipline, and he remained on the force. So these complaints and others all occurred while Baker was still on probationary officer, and during which CPD they could have terminated him there without worrying about the union because he wasn't under union control as a probationary officer. They could have just said, you know, we're done with you right now. So despite all these complaints, despite all their knowledge, despite Krystal even telling them that he was reckless, despite all the knowledge that CPD knew, they assigned Baker to the 6th District TAC team, a specialized and very sought-after unit within the department, despite his evident unfitness for duty as a Chicago Police Department officer, let alone serving on a specialized unit. So I'd like to turn it over now to Maura White, one of our senior attorneys, who will talk to you even more about the personal relationship between Krystal and Carlos, and she will walk you also through some additional details in the complaint. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Good morning, everyone. Carlos Baker's actions towards women were not a secret. The city of Chicago was on notice of his danger to women as early as 2022. And that was the domestic violence complaint that was made when a woman with whom he was romantically involved reported that he brandished a gun at her at a local bar. That happened before he dated Krystal Rivera. Her allegations demonstrate that Carlos Baker posed a particular risk to women with whom he has or has had a dating relationship. But as Tony mentioned, the city of Chicago, through COPA and CPD, tragically dropped the ball in its duty to thoroughly investigate and discipline Baker for this behavior. Had they done so, he likely would have lost his badge, and Krystal would be alive today. A bit of background about me before we get into some more facts. Before I worked here at Romanucci Blandin, I was a federal prosecutor in the Civil Rights Division in Washington, D.C., and I worked on law enforcement misconduct cases all over the country. Before that, I was a Cook County prosecutor right here in Chicago, and I spent more than 4.5 years in the Domestic Violence Division. And the conduct that was described in that complaint in 2022 constitutes domestic violence under the Illinois Domestic Violence Act, just like Tony said. And the federal law in place would require someone who is convicted of even a misdemeanor never to be able to ship, transport, receive firearms or ammunition, or even possess them. Importantly, this law provides no exception for law enforcement officers. That law recognizes, as it should, that domestic violence is a serious offense, and police officers are not afforded a special or different system of justice. Now, as it relates to CPD, back in 2017, the United States Department of Justice released a report following their pattern and practice investigation into the department. DOJ found that officers frequently minimize the seriousness of sexual misconduct and domestic violence accusations against colleagues and did not employ best investigative techniques or means of resolving these allegations. But despite being under a federal court consent decree requiring reform of CPD's practices for investigating and disciplining alleged misconduct, CPD has failed to implement adequate changes to its policies and practices regarding investigations and discipline into misconduct, like domestic violence. Let's spend a moment to talk about Krystal and Carlos Baker. As Tony mentioned, they began their romantic relationship in 2023 when they worked together as CPD partners. They continued an on and off romantic relationship for approximately 2 years until she ended that relationship just before her death. We believe that during this romantic relationship, he denied being romantically involved with anyone else. However, upon information and belief, we also think that he maintained a long-term relationship with a second woman with whom he lived. We believe that that woman was unaware of his relationship with Krystal. By September of 2023, Krystal and Baker's romantic relationship was known to other members of the Chicago Police Department, including 2 supervisors in their chain of command. We believe that CPD knew that Krystal had previously requested a different partner due to her safety concerns about Baker's reckless conduct. And around February of this year, Krystal learned that Carlos Baker was involved in a long-term romantic relationship and that he lived with that woman. After Krystal learned of this, she repeatedly told Baker that she intended to disclose their prior romantic relationship to his long-term girlfriend. And in late May of this year, Krystal ended her relationship with Baker, but the 2 remained partners at the 6th District's TAC team. Now, other members of CPD knew about this breakup, and they knew that that happened after Krystal discovered the other relationship. And after Krystal ended that relationship, she expressed concerns about his adverse reaction to the breakup and his continued attempts to contact her outside of work about personal matters. In the early morning hours of June 4th of this year, less than 48 hours before Krystal's death, Carlos Baker showed up at her home uninvited after she told him multiple times not to come. Just hours later, on June 5th, she would die from a gunshot wound fired by his weapon, and he stood by, doing nothing to save her life. The 9-count complaint was filed today in the Circuit Court of Cook County by our law firm, Romanucci Blandin, on behalf of Yolanda Rivera, who is the mother and the administrator of Krystal's estate. It alleges that her death was caused not only by Baker's willful and wanton conduct, but was also the foreseeable consequence of the city's own negligence in retaining Baker and assigning him as Rivera's partner, despite the knowledge that he posed danger. And I'm just going to read briefly from the complaint. Any police officer shot in the line of duty has one expectation: that they can immediately count on their fellow officers to come to their aid. Officer Krystal Rivera should have been able to rely on her partner to do just that. But against all decency, her partner not only shot her, but then ran in the opposite direction and left her to die. Our lawsuit is seeking a trial by jury, and the 9 counts include 2 counts of willful and wanton conduct, 1 count of intentional infliction of emotional distress, claims for respondeat superior and indemnification, 2 counts of negligent retention, and 2 counts of negligent supervision. I'd like to give Yolanda, Krystal's mother, an opportunity to share her thoughts. Yolanda, take it.
morning, everyone. Thank you for being here, everyone, this morning. I want to tell everyone, that every day is a painful as we continue to grieve the loss of my daughter, Krystal. Her child, her sisters, our family, and an entire community miss her deeply. We miss her laughter, her bold spirit, her light. That grief does not ease with time. It doesn't ease. It follows us every day. From this moment forward, my purpose is simple: that those responsible for her death must be held accountable. Krystal was proud, a Chicago police officer. Our family has a long history of service in this department. When I was younger, I dreamed of becoming an officer myself. But life took me to another direction. But Krystal fulfilled that dream for both of us. She became our family's first female police officer, and we were incredibly proud of her. I want to tell you that she was preparing to take the detective exam. She had a future filled with promise. She had leadership and served the city with love, because she loved the city. Yet Krystal understood the dangers of this job. She accepted the risk that came with policing. What she never should have had to fear was her own partner. That betrayal cost Krystal's life. Krystal loved protecting the public. But I can say that CPD failed to protect Krystal. Yet there were warning signs. There were many complaints. There were opportunities to intervene. And yet, nothing was done. That failure was devastating consequences. But let me be clear today. This is about truth. This is about accountability. And this is about making sure that what happened to Krystal never happens to another family. Krystal believed in justice, and that belief is what led her to wear her badge every day. And now I ask for the city of Chicago directly, where is justice for Krystal? Where is justice for my daughter, Krystal Rivera? And I hope, and we hope, that this legal action brings real answers, real accountability, and real change, so that no other family has to stand here where we're all standing today. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Ms. Rivera, can you share a comment in Spanish?
At this
Whatever is
point.
in your heart, just, what are you asking the police department right now? ¿Qué le pide a la policía? ¿Qué le exige a la policía?
Yo quiero justicia por Krystal. Ella no merece lo que le pasó a ella. She didn't deserve what happened. Thank you.
Tony, are you alleging that there was a cover-up here or just a failure to act on the part of the police?
Well, there certainly was a cover-up on Carlos Baker's part. We know that. He immediately tried to cover it up. And then when you look at the timeline of the announcements by even, Chief Superintendent Snelling, he perpetuated what Baker had to say even, 6 hours later, and then the reports that were filed. So, at a certain point, we know that there was a cover-up, but we don't know how long it was perpetuated. That's something that we're going to uncover during discovery and depositions. We've undergone as thorough an investigation and forensic analysis of evidence that we have, but we're a little constrained until we get a little bit more. But we do know that Carlos Baker immediately tried to cover it up.
What about him gave him that kind of indemnity within the department?
Well, he was on duty. He was under color of law. They were both wearing uniforms. They were enforcing the law. So I don't think indemnification will be a problem. If it does, let's cross that bridge and we'll address it then. Yes, sir.
Darius Johnson from CBS Chicago. Can you talk to us a little bit more in detail, if you can, about that timeline of when they first possibly became partners, and then when she first went to those supervisors to basically ask for him no longer to be her partner? Was this all in that May of 2025, 1 month before? Just trying to figure out exactly how long these supervisors were aware of her concerns.
So if you don't mind, I may turn it over to either Maura or Josh, who can answer that question, and they'll give you a little bit more detail on that.
Thank you.
Of course.
Absolutely. So we know at this point in our investigation that in September of 2023, CPD was aware of their romantic relationship. And we know that Krystal Rivera previously requested a different partner from Officer Baker due to safety concerns. As you'll see outlined more in our complaint, we do lay out some of that timeline, but she also became concerned about his behavior after they had ended their relationship closer to the time of the shooting.
Baker has been charged with domestic violence.
Repeat the question.
Should he have been charged with domestic violence?
I can answer it.
Yeah. Which time? Go ahead, Josh.
Sure. Hi, I'm Josh Levin, one of the attorneys on the case. I mean, the short answer is that it's impossible to say for sure whether or not he should have been charged with domestic violence, because COPA did not complete an adequate investigation based on the facts that we know at this point in our investigation. Had that investigation been followed through to completion as a thorough, comprehensive, adequate investigation into credible claims by a romantic partner of his that he had brandished his weapon at her, then I could give you an absolute yes or no on whether or not he should have been charged.
Is that person involved in that relationship part of this lawsuit as well? Are they acting as a witness?
Not at this time.
Can anyone give details? I know that Carlos Baker lost his police powers during the summer. Is he still with the Chicago Police Department in any capacity right now, as far as you all know?
No, that we're aware of. This man only lost his police powers after he battered another Chicago police officer during the summer. So it took multiple acts of perceived domestic violence for the CPD to finally say, oh, after he killed one of our own and now he's going to go beat up another one, maybe now we should relieve him of all his police powers. So as far as we know, standing here today, he has no role, absolutely, in policing. He's not administrative. He has no duty whatsoever.
Tony, what's the department policy with regard to partners being romantically involved? Does that disqualify you from partnership, or should it?
So it does not disqualify you for partnership. The rules are that it is 100% prohibited to have your romantic relationship while you're on duty. When it's off duty, as long as it's consensual, it's allowed, but there are qualifiers. It cannot be conflicting, It can't affect your professional judgment. It cannot, there are some other qualifiers. So it's allowed. It's allowed as long as it doesn't interfere with your job. And here, it clearly interfered with their job. Krystal said it's interfering with the job. I don't want to be with him. And that's, I think that's the answer.
Was the family aware of their relationship? Did she at any moment express any concerns to her family members, her sisters, her mother?
All I can tell you is that the family was aware. They were aware.
Were they aware of her safety concerns after the breakup in regards to them still being partners?
That's something that'll come out during discovery. Thank you.
One more question if you got one.
Is there any hope for a possible special prosecutor in this case after the civil side of it is resolved and that somehow criminally Baker might be charged further?
Well, our understanding is that, you know, the current Cook County State's Attorney is declining charges. Whether or not there can be another run at this, given what we determine and find out, that's always a hope. You know, that's always a hope that as we uncover more, that we can go back and ask again. You know, your request for a special prosecutor, or your question for a special prosecutor, I think that's above my pay grade right now to answer. If we get one, you know, there has to be a request made, and then, you know, the presiding judge in criminal would have to assign one. So that there's a few layers to get there. But we can take another run at this. There's no doubt. There would be no statute on what happened here. So as we uncover more, we'd be happy to go back.
Thank you. Tony, any closing comment?
I probably did, but I don't know right now.
Fair
You
enough.
know, yeah.
Everyone's received lots of comment. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate your.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.